Hello, hello, hello. Now, you may have noticed, if you've watched television commercials over the last 10 or 15 years, that it is extraordinarily common to see mixed-race couples subtly inserted into the background. It doesn't seem to matter what is being sold, whether it's furniture, whether it's breakfast cereal, whatever it happens to be, there tends to be a subtle mixed race couple there, as if to send a kind of message to society that mixed race couples are the norm, and indeed mixed race couples are a good thing. Now, whether mixed race couples are a good thing or not, and by what standards they are a good thing, it is not really important to me. But what is important to me is understanding the nature of mixed race couples and mixed race people, because this is interesting, because they're not some random thing. They're a certain specific group of people, and having a child by someone of a different race from you is likely to have certain consequences, and this is what I want to look at in this video today. What is the nature of being mixed race, and is it some utopia of the kind that is portrayed in the mainstream media, or is there, as it were, a dark side to being mixed race, to what used to be called miscegenation? Now, on the one hand, many of you may be familiar with the concept of hybrid vigour. You have this concept in animals and plants. The idea is that if you take two strains that are different from each other and you breed them together, then you end up with a hardier strain. You end up with a strain that is more healthy. And the reason this happens is because the likelihood of the offspring inheriting harmful double doses of mutant genes is reduced, and so therefore you have an offspring that is healthier. Now, there's an extent to which we would expect this to be true with mixed race people, and certainly there's often a stereotype about mixed race people being good looking, having physically attractive faces at the very least. Now, what is a physically attractive face? Well, as we've looked at in other videos, a physically attractive face is a symmetrical face. A face is symmetrical in part because it doesn't have many mutant genes which make it asymmetrical, or because the person who has this face has a good immune system, and this allows him to maintain a symmetrical phenotype in the face of disease and whatever else life throws at him, and so consequently he maintains a symmetrical face. So it's saying he has good genes, either in terms of his immune system or just in terms of the degree to which they're reflected in his face, and so of course this makes this person attractive. And we can perhaps think of many examples of mixed race people who are commonly regarded as attractive. They have low levels of these mutations. A good example, physically attractive I mean, would be someone like Naomi Campbell. Naomi Campbell is, I think, is she half, she's Jamaican, it's something like half white and half Jamaican, and the Jamaican side is part Chinese or something. So she's very much a mixture, and she's commonly regarded as extremely good looking. But interestingly, she's also extremely violent and extremely mentally unstable. And this brings me on to the other aspect of miscegenation, an aspect which is less likely to be expressed in TV commercials and less likely to be expressed in extras in comedies that happen to be mixed race or whatever. The negative side of miscegenation. You have what we might call outbreeding depression, things getting worse rather than better because you outbreed. Now, let's have a look at this. There's a paper, and I've pasted the information about it in the comment below this video, which has looked at this. And what it has found is that if you compare those who are, black, this is American data, black, white, Asian, or indeed Native American, and you compare them to those who are mixed race, then, or who identify as mixed race, then on pretty much every measure, those who are mixed race indicate greater mental instability than those who are of one race. Those who are mixed race are more likely to suffer from depression. They are more likely to suffer from, to be inclined to commit suicide. They are more likely to have problems with drugs or alcohol. They are more likely to be violent. They are more likely to have problems in school with behaviour and so on. And indeed, they are more likely on various measures of physical health to do badly as well, in terms of having frequent headaches and other such measures. So the implication is that those who are mixed race are more likely than those who are monoracial to be mentally unstable. Now, why would this be the case? How can we possibly explain this? If surely, if they have a lower level of mutant genes, which makes them stereotypically at least better looking, because they're more symmetrical, and also because perhaps there's a degree to which we find unusual gene combinations inherently attractive because they indicate health, how can they be doing worse on mental health and on physical poor health, which is often perhaps a psychosomatic manifestation of poor mental health, such as headaches and that kind of thing? What's going on here? How can this be? Even criminality, by the way, mixed race people seem to be more inclined towards. What's going on here? Well, one possibility, that the sort of sociological possibility, is simply that they're not sure who they are. They have an unstable sense of identity. They're not sure, whether they're black or white, as it were, and so this makes them feel bad, and this makes them suffer from mental problems. Now, I have to say, I don't see how that can explain everything. And moreover, if somebody has identity problems, an inability to create a stable identity, this is often itself a reflection of mental instability, and itself a reflection of some deeper underlying problem. So it's no good to say that they have an identity problem. You could argue, okay, there they have an identity problem, and that's a manifestation of some broader problem, because these kinds of personality, the personality and so on, the neuroticism, mental instability, tends to be somewhere in the region of up to about 0.66 genetic. So it's extremely unlikely that it's solely a matter of the fact that they're mixed race, which makes these people more likely to be violent and more likely to be mentally unstable and so on. A second possibility is what we might call, as we say, outbreeding depression. This is the idea that you see this in animals, that certain genes basically are certain alleles, certain gene forms are so different that they're not supposed to go together, and when they do go together, they malfunction. And you see this in the animal kingdom when, for example, you have a liger. So a male lion has sex with a female tiger. You end up with a liger, and they tend to look peculiar, and they often tend to be infertile as well. They don't function properly. Or similarly, is it called a tyon? I can't remember whether it's a male tiger and a female lion. And the best known example, of course, is a mule, where it's a donkey and a horse. And they tend to be, though there is a degree to which they are hardier, interestingly. People use mules for certain purposes. There's a degree to which mules are hardier than either a horse or a donkey. And that's why people use mules for certain things, and mules take you down the Grand Canyon or whatever. But they tend to be infertile, and they tend to have all kinds of problems. Now, there's some evidence for this, interestingly, because what this would predict would be that the more genetically different the two races were that interbred, the more likely the child, the offspring, would be to have these mental problems. And there's some evidence that this is the case, because it's been found that if the mixture is white and Asian, and this is a bit complicated in America, because in America Asian is this useless term which includes both South Asians and Northeast Asians. But if it's white and Asian, then the odds ratio of them being more mentally unstable than either a white or an Asian is less than if it is white and black, or if it is Asian and black. And this makes sense because of course the genetic difference between a white person and a black person, or between an Asian person and a black person, is larger than the genetic difference between a white person and an Asian. And indeed, if we're talking about South Asians and white people are very closely genetically related. They're both Caucasian. But even if you compare Northeast Asians and whites, the relationship is closer than between whites and blacks. So this actually fits. Those who are a mixture of black and white are more mentally unstable either than blacks or whites on certain key measures, but this is less obviously the case when we're comparing white and Asian admixture. So that actually fits with the hypothesis that it's something to do with outbreeding depression. And similarly, they've done studies where they compared a Native American and Asian. Well, to the extent that the Asian category composes of Northeast Asian, again, they're very closely related, relatively closely related. That fits as well. So that's one possibility, that it's outbreeding depression. Basically, the genes are too different, and this, although it has positive consequences in that you have fewer mutant genes, and this makes you better looking, it also has negative consequences, which is that the brain, which remember it's about 84% of the genome, it works in a suboptimal way, and as a consequence of that, the person is more likely to be mentally unstable than a person who is just black or just white or just Asian or just Native American. So that's one explanation that's quite interesting. Another explanation is although I don't know that that's the main cause. Another explanation is that it is self-selection, that there is a certain kind of person who is interested in mixed race relationships, and this seems to me to be much more probable. So we've discussed in other videos this concept of RK selection. In an unstable yet relatively easy ecology, the best thing to do, because you could be wiped out at any moment, is to have sex with as many people as possible and thus have as many children as possible and hope that some survive. As the ecology becomes more stable, the carrying capacity for the particular species is reached, and as it becomes harsher, the carrying capacity is reached. Consequently, the different members of the species start to compete against each other. And this creates a kind of arms race where the more adapted you are to the predictable ecology, the more likely you are to survive. What this means in an ecology that is harsh is that if you have lots and lots of children that aren't adapted to the ecology, they could all just die. And so a better thing to do is to invest less in sex, to invest more in nurture, to have a smaller number of children, and to make sure that those children are adapted to the ecology. You do this by investing more energy in nurturing them so that they kind of understand the ecology and they're adapted to it and it all makes sense to them. Consequently, life slows down. So the first one was what we call a fast life history strategy. This is what we call a slow life history strategy. And in this context, then the more intelligent you are, the more likely you are to pass on your genes, and the more sort of cooperative you are, the more you can learn, the more you can rule, follow, and be conscientious, the more likely you are to pass on your genes, because it's a highly predictable environment. And so you therefore end up with two very different kinds of people. The fast life history strategists will tend to be impulsive, they will tend to be aggressive, and they will tend to be mentally unstable because there won't be any heavy selection against mental instability, whereas the slow life history strategists will tend to be cooperative, they will tend to be have high impulse control and be rule following, and they will tend to be mentally stable because these things will help them to learn and help them to navigate the environment and help them to sort of fit in. Also, in these slow ecologies, you're more likely to survive if you can create highly cooperative groups, and these groups are more likely to work if its members are cooperative and they and so on, and learn mental instability, and so this selects again, for this certain kind of personality that's mentally stable and so on. And also in such an ecology, remember, you have to invest in your offspring, and you're going to be better at doing that, and better at nurturing if you are mentally stable, if you are agreeable, you don't get angry and kill your offspring, and if you are highly rule following in a highly predictable ecology. So you end up therefore with these two at the extremes, these two different kinds of people. It could be argued that in the R ecology, you could be wiped out at any minute, and so the best thing to do is take risks because, well, you might as well. And in the K ecology, it's a bad thing to take risks. Taking risks is potentially very dangerous because you're going to be highly adapted to that ecology. Now, what this means, if you are in the K ecology, if you're a K strategist, is of course you are passing on fewer of your genes. Remember, you're having smaller numbers of children with smaller numbers of females, and so you are therefore going for quality over quantity. You're passing on, you're making sure you pass on your genes, but you're potentially passing on fewer of them. Now, that being the case, it follows that you should want to be sexually attracted to people who are relatively genetically similar to you, because this will maximize the extent to which you pass on your genes. Also, you will want to be attracted to people who are relatively similar to you genetically, because personality and things like this tend to be highly genetic, in the region of 0.5 to 0.6, something like that, and there'll be less likely to be arguments, less likely to be fights, you're more likely to get on the more similar you are. This is known as genetic similarity theory. It's J. Philippe Rushton who has done a lot of research on this. Now, what this means is that there is an optimum to which a K strategist is attracted. If you're attracted to someone that's too similar to you, then this is going to be a problem, because of course then you're elevating the possibility of harmful double doses of mutant genes. Attract someone who's too different from you, and you aren't maximizing your genetic fitness by passing on more of your genes. And it seems that, according to data from Iceland, those we are optimally attracted to are our third cousins or equivalent thereof. A genetic equivalent thereof, which is interesting, about 2% above the baseline of the society. Which is interesting because, of course, most people in modern societies, you might know who a few of your second cousins are, i.e. your father's cousins' kids, but you'll tend not to know any of your grandfather's cousins. So it's interesting that that's where the line is. So that's what people who are K strategists, and therefore tend to be mentally stable, that's what they tend to do. They tend to sexually select for relative similarity, to sexually select for people who are like them. Now, that's not what R strategists do. R strategists do quite the opposite, as we've just discussed. They will select for difference. What they are selecting for in their unstable ecology is someone who is very good looking and has good genes, and it's telling them they have good genes. And once that's controlled, or once as a man you're selecting for a girl who is young, therefore fertile, and has symmetrical features, and therefore fertile, and has good secondary sexual characteristics, and therefore good genes, then what do you do within that category? Well, you should actually go for someone that's genetically quite different from you, because by doing that, they might carry some useful gene that will be a benefit. So you may as well take the risk of going for someone that's quite different from you. So you would expect, our strategists, you would expect mentally unstable people to be and people with low impulse control and so on, to be attracted to those who are genetically quite different from them. And this is therefore why, among working class people in England, and class is a factor of RK strategy, people who are working class do tend to be faster life history strategists. There's quite good data on this. You get the black goes for blonde stereotype. You get the blonde-haired woman who's sexually attracted to the black man who is very genetically different from him. And equally, you get the working class white man who goes to Thailand, let's say, and hooks up with some unstable relationship with some Thai woman who is genetically very different from him. Or you get J. Philippe Rushton himself, who I have argued, this psychologist from Canada, who I have showed in another video, was a highly intelligent, fast life history strategist. And it makes sense. Intelligence, by the way, at the individual level does not correlate with life history strategy. And it makes sense that well, his second wife was from Turkey, his third wife was Jewish, and he had an affair with a married black woman and had an illegitimate child with her. well, this all fits. People say he's, racist psychologist, but this all fits. This is exactly what you'd expect. You'd expect someone like that to engage in outbreeding. Now, of course, what this therefore means is that these people who contract mixed race relationships are not representative of the population. They will tend to be relative R strategists. They will tend to be relatively mentally unstable, relatively low in impulse control, relatively low in agreeableness. There's data from Finland which has shown that the divorce rate among mixed race relationships is extremely high compared to that among Finns. There's loads of other data on that. Now, often this has been put down to the fact that, oh, well, they have arguments because, I don't know, I want to drink tea with milk and my wife's Finn and she wants to drink tea without milk or whatever. Or I want to drink coffee with milk and Finns like to drink coffee, very strong coffee with like a molecule of milk in it, or whatever. It seems to be a simpler explanation is that the divorce rate is high because the people who contract these relationships are relative R strategists, and so consequently they create weaker social bonds, and so they are more likely to argue and and they're more likely to divorce. So this is what this is implying. This is implying, therefore, that what's going on is that a mixed race child is the product of who we've seen tends to be mentally unstable and badly behaved, is the product of two mentally unstable, badly behaved parents. And it's because they're mentally unstable and badly behaved that they have chosen to contract a mixed race relationship, and therefore they pass on these instabilities, these mental problems, whatever, to the child. And then perhaps this is made worse in the child by this outbreeding depression factor that we already discussed, leading to them being acutely mentally unstable and badly behaved, and so on. So that would be an explanation, it seems to me, that would make a great deal of sense. Now, there's one argument against that. Is there was a study which J. Philippe Rushton did in Hawaii, where he found that there are relationships in Hawaii between whites living in Hawaii and Japanese Americans living in Hawaii, and he found that those people, although they are physically, of course, they're quite different, mentally they're very, very similar. And in fact, they are engaging in genetic similarity theory. They are more mentally similar on highly genetic markers, such as intelligence or whatever, than are a couple who are of the same race. So it's as though they are overcompensating for their physical difference by being very, very mentally similar, which is of course important because your brain, the mind, is about 84% of the genome. So actually, in terms of passing on your genes and elevating your genetic interests, you should really go for the mind. The mind should be particularly important in terms of doing that. Now, this is an interesting nuance then, I think, within the theory, which is that presumably within those who engage in mixed race relationships, you're going to get differences. So it may be the case that in general, these mixed race relationships are these R-selected people, maybe even highly intelligent R-selected people, but R-selected people who therefore have these more mentally unstable offspring. But within that, you may also, it opens up the possibility that you will get people who are relatively K-selected and who, for whatever reason, find themselves attracted to an East Asian person, if they're white. And it would follow that that would be more likely to happen, of course, if they were elevating their genetic interests by being particularly mentally similar. So I don't see that undermines the argument. It's just a manifestation of K strategy. You can operate K strategy in the way you would expect, i.e. by going for someone that's physically and mentally similar to you, but you can also do so by going for someone who's very, very, very physically similar to you, or very, very, very mentally similar to you. And indeed, you would expect the case strategist to go for the latter, A, because it would elevate his interests more, genetic interests, and B, because it would mean there'd be less likely to be arguments and there'd be a more stable relationship and all this kind of thing. And so therefore there'd be a better opportunity to nurture the child. And that's what case strategists are evolved towards nurturing the child. So I don't see that as a problem. And what that would predict is that you would get lots of relationships in, let's say, America between relatively middle-class white men and, let's say, East Asian women, or Jewish men and East Asian women. And this would bring in, of course, other factors as well, such as this hypergamy, this idea that women tend to sexually select for status, men are more likely to sexually select for looks, because the man is more R strategist, he has less to lose from the sexual encounter. The woman is more K strategist, she has more to lose, and so therefore her offspring are more likely to survive if the man will invest in them and her. And so I looked at another study at this idea of sort of racial or cultural hypergamy, and we showed in this study that in Finland, in multicultural marriages, the higher the status of the nation, the richer the country is than Finland, the more likely the marriage is to be a female Finn and a foreign man, and if it's a poorer country than Finland, the more likely it is to be a male Finn and a foreign woman. Now, follow from that, I suppose, that East Asian women might see white people as, in some sense, superior due to the greater cultural accomplishments of Europe, and therefore be sexually attracted to white men and Jews. So that would seem to fit. Whereas at the other extreme, if you are a female and you are sexually attracted to a black man, that would be considered to be a racial group that is, obviously all the countries they're relatively poor, and so therefore you're obviously not particularly interested in marrying hypergamously. You're not interested in marrying for status in that way. You're interested in somebody who's tough and big and going to look after you. And of course, therefore, that would be an R strategy decision. Whereas if you're the Asian woman and you go for the white man, that would be a K strategy decision. So that again fits with the theory overall. Now, I was inspired to look into this actually by a school teacher who wrote to me about this and said, well, these were his observations at his school, that the mixed-race children were often kind of unstable and badly behaved, and what did I think about this? And also I was inspired by a colleague of mine, Emil Kierkegaard, who did a website it's worth looking at a while ago called, and he did a short entry on the website called "Does Miscegenation Damage Your Kids?" And it got me thinking about the causes of it, perhaps more than he looked at. And so I think that's perhaps what's going on. And so when we see this increasing representation of mixed race couples, and you see it all the time in American popular culture, and we know it's unlikely. I mean, I've sat in restaurants in New York where it's literally racially segregated. You've got the whites sitting here, there are white tables, and there are a few black tables, and there are Hispanic tables, and there are maybe even a few Asian or Northeast Asian American tables, and occasionally they'll kind of cross over, but it's of course relatively rare. And I suspect it's relatively rare for sound genetic reasons. People are attracted to those who are genetically similar to them in most circumstances, and only if they are R strategists or will they tend to be selected, or in general, to those who are genetically quite different from them. Although there may be an exception, as we discussed, in terms of being attracted to people of a different race who are mentally very similar. But in general, you would expect, therefore, the products of these R strategist mixed-race relationships to be unstable and to be violent and to have these kinds of problems, and it seems to be that is the case. Now, what would be really interesting in terms of future research would be to take this idea of outbreeding depression further. The two most genetically different peoples on Earth are the Aborigines of Australia and the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert. You can't get two races more different than those. And it would be very interesting to see if they could produce fertile offspring. That would be absolutely fascinating. But anyway, that would be something for another another video. Anyway, I hope this has been of interest, and if you have enjoyed it, then please, feel free to drop me a few shekels on Patreon or Subscribestar. I will always put it to good use in making more videos or doing more research or whatever. That would be very kind of you. And I hope you've had a good, everything's going well. And I'd like to thank all of you for the various interesting comments that you've sent me on the left-handedness video and on other videos I've done. I'd like to emphasize that in terms of mixed-race relationships and people taking risks and so on, that my book, The Silent Rape Epidemic, How the Finns Were Groomed to Love Their Abusers, has now been published on Amazon, so please feel free to go and buy a copy before it gets taken down. Of course, this is interesting in terms of mixed-race relationships because you have these relative R-strategist Arab men grooming and raping, or statutorily raping, working class white girls, and you would expect the working class white girls to be relative R-strategists and therefore attracted to people who weren't Finns and attracted to Arabs, and this kind of thing. So it actually fits in what we've been talking about today. But if you want to know anything about more detail, then please buy the book. And also I look in more detail at this issue of race mixing and so on in my book J. Philippe Rushton, A Life History Perspective. So if you want to know more, then please purchase that. And otherwise, I'd like to thank the teacher who suggested this idea for a talk. And if you have any other ideas, then please feel free to get in touch. And I will see you soon. And goodbye.